Grey Knights, the Emperor's secret demon hunters, space marines crafted from the genetic lineage of his most perfect self. Because during the Horus Heresy it became clear that chaos established a foothold in the Materium, and that's why the Imperium needed a different type of transhuman soldier, as space marines had proven susceptible to the whispers of chaos. So the Emperor personally contributed his own genetic material that was used as a base to create the Grey Knights. Which means at some point, Malcador probably stood in front of him with a golden chalice saying the words, "Sire, into the cup." Some say that moment alone generated a new minor chaos god, the god of awkward eye contact. And that's, my son, is how Grey Knights were born. And that's also why, like the Emperor himself, they are psychic and immune to the corruption of chaos, which is called the Emperor's gift. So in a sense, the Grey Knights exist for one purpose only: to punch demons so hard they forget their own true names. So pure are they in their existence that they look like noble paladins in sacred armor, shiny and polished and simply flawless perfection. Which is exactly why I wanted to paint them.
Right? Wrong.
See, everyone paints their Grey Knights with that perfect bright silver, clean highlights, and maybe a splash of blue glow. But ever since we cooked up the grimdark style based on sponge painting and unleashed the first Space Marines on the world, people have been asking non-stop how to adapt this to Grey Knights. And the question on everyone's mind is, how would they look if they have been fighting in the warp for 100 years and the last servitor has gone mad and had to be put down decades ago? So that's what we will do today. But while it would be easy to just repeat what we did in the very first video, I want to try something slightly different. And I have no idea if that will work. And yes, these are the converted Grey Knight Terminators from my last video, where I resized them using modern Terminator bodies so they don't look like angry silver toddlers next to Primaris Marines. The conversion video is on the channel if you want to see how I made them look like they belong in the current range instead of a 2008 time capsule. So today we are drawing it all together by painting these guys up. So lean back, light your incense, and let's see if we can give the Emperor's purest demon slayers a look that tells 1,000 stories from the warp. I started from a black base coat. Right on top of that, the idea was to add a really intense blue. So I dug up my Chimera colors again. Now, of course, these single pigment Chimera colors are really intense, and I'm a bit worried that it might be too intense. And I'm aware that I'm experimenting on a miniature that is kind of unique because there's a lot of time invested into the conversion. But even though I'm slightly worried, I think this could still be cool. So let's continue with the next step. And so I slapped on 2 layers of phthalo blue, but it was quickly obvious that this would look over the top and even slightly heretic. It would produce the kind of glow leading to the Inquisition to schedule a friendly chat about your life choices. Investigation title, Suspicious Pigment Activity. It's the sort of blue that says, "Yes, brother captain, I swear this isn't Tzeentch's favorite shade." And as you can see, it became more evident that this just wasn't it, once I applied the metal colors in particular. As wrong as it looked though, it did give me the right idea about how to progress. So I switched back to more of a blue-gray, using Army Painter's deep gray and adding a little bit of the Chimera color for more intensity. And I just covered all of the mini using a big brush and without a care in the world. Much like Order Malleus, swift, decisive, and slightly overconfident. Then I went back to the metallics. In this case I used Shining Silver by Army Painter, and using a sponge I created my initial texture. Clearly the idea is to create reflective areas on top of a matte color and reaping the benefits of the contrast this creates, and the slightly blue colored underpainting setting the tone while also having everything clearly read as metallics. I started on the more exposed and large areas, like the top of the Terminator box, to see if the texture looked right and whether it would work with the gray base color. I also still try to figure out how much space to cover. You see, the grimdark technique usually shines when you leave a darker base color to shine through, especially on the edges, but here I thought it would be better to take advantage of the reflectiveness of the metallics to create really shiny and pronounced edges, to create some good readability and have the texture do the heavy lifting when making the surface look worn and aged. I really like the patterns the metallics leave when sponged on, so unlike when I do chipping with other colors, there was no further preparation needed. The resulting patterns look nicely irregular and the individual dots look jagged, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. I did focus a bit more on exposed areas, like the upper area of the shoulders and the top of the shin guard of the leg stepping forward. I also made sure the parts that should be gold later received a good amount of the metallic paint, and we'll see in a bit why this is important. Usually, in these videos, what I do is I invest a little extra time into cleaning up the results. I know this sounds whack, but what I mean is, I will take a brush and put in some extra stippling in harder to reach areas, basically to try and avoid the result looking like a random mess done by a sponge and more like an actual piece of armor that just happened to be exposed to all kind of things that would make it deteriorate. Here I just really wanted to try how it would look if I didn't care at all. I wanted the true wargamer experience and tried to be as fast as possible. I just hit everything with the sponge and whatever happened would be my result. And not only was it really quick, it also ended up looking really good. I just made sure to pick up some paint, got rid of most of it again by dabbing it on a paper towel, and then tested the patterns on a sheet of paper. This way I would on one hand avoid blobs, but also patterns that didn't look credible because there was too little paint on the sponge. On the backside, like on the legs, I was happy to touch the easily reachable parts and leave the deeper areas to not obscure the blue-gray. Next I wanted to build more contrast, and I took the Army Painter's Grim Black Speed Paint and thinned it about 50-50 with Speed Paint Medium. I use mixes like this as washes that are easily controllable and stay mostly in the recesses, which gives the piece more much needed definition. And I covered all of these recesses around the lettering on the armor and everything else I wanted shaded. What I do here is just throw the mix on and spread it all over the surface, so we don't get any coffee staining, and then guide it more into the recesses to stay there and leave the higher areas more or less unstained. I would usually use a little speed paint medium to make absolutely sure there is no residue on the brighter surfaces. I just wipe everything off with the medium. But here I didn't go to this length because I knew I wanted to add another highlight anyway. So having a slightly darker layer of metallics as a base for that was fine. At this point I started working on the gold. And you can see that the whole piece is rather dark, but it will be alright eventually. Since the areas I wanted gold were already metallic and shaded, I only had to stain them slightly. And for that I used Imperial Fist contrast paint mixed with a little burnt sienna ink to make it darker. And this builds a nice muted base color for the gold that fits perfectly with the darker theme, almost giving it a reliquary-like tone. And any of the gold parts I wanted darker, I covered in thin layers of burnt sienna until I was happy with the intensity and hue. This next step was supposed to draw everything together, and it worked out really well. I just took shining silver again and dabbed it on areas I wanted highlighted. And that included all areas facing up that would catch more light, and also some volumes I wanted more defined, like that little flap on the butt I gave a central highlight since it's basically a cylinder, and the same idea applies to the legs, and then I also highlighted the helmet, the front of the legs, feet and collar. You get the idea. You can see that I don't mind hitting all the gold areas too. In fact, I want them to catch a lot of this silver, because this would give them additional texture and I could use it as a gold highlight in the last step. And looking at it now, I think you could leave these as highlights on the gold if you wanted to. It results in a more desaturated gold and kind of draws everything together in a satisfying way. Personally, I just wanted to bring back more of a saturated color highlight in these parts, so I took some pure Imperial Fists yellow and covered most of the silver on the gold parts. This keeps them rather bright, but at the same time makes them look more yellow again. I think this results in a rich but gritty gold that fits the theme perfectly. At this point the mini looks super messy, but it's all about trusting the process and pushing forward. However, to minimize the visual clutter a little, I'm painting all parts I still need to define in black. So the eyes, the purity seals, the book on the chest, exhaust slits on the back, the little monitors on the arm and the loincloth. I started the purity seals from a desaturated brown and added more and more pale grey blue by Vallejo. I like these desaturated cold grey blues a lot for highlighting my grimdark projects. It's a really great fit for these rougher textures and muted overall feeling. And since texture is king in this context, I'm using line patterns for applying the highlights. And that really gives the paper some weights and also an aged result, almost making them look like they went through 500 sanctifications each. Eventually I was using pure pale gray blue, and I used it to paint the brightest highlights, like the apex of that curved scroll in the front and some of the edges facing up. The wax got a layer of red right over the black base color, and I made sure to leave out all the shadow areas, so they would stay extra dark. And then I gradually added highlights with a desaturated color. This light red by Ionic did the trick nicely, but of course you can just add a beige to your base red to dial back saturation. These personal heraldry shields are always my favorite things to do. They are kept in red, white and black, since these were the colors the first grandmasters used when the emperor personally told them to go forth and bully some demons. The shields tell of great deeds performed by their bearers, each icon having its own obscure meaning. More obvious, the skulls telling of grand demons slain in battle, and down to small things like which color is above the other, alignment of panel divisions, or crenellated lines signifying other more cryptic details of a life serving the emperor. And of course, red, white and black always works really well with the overall gritty theme, especially if you weather them up a little. But before we get into that, let me thank today's video sponsor, Into DAM. They started out as a company producing amazing graphic tees, but have grown into an apparel powerhouse, offering all kinds of clothing from elegant, everyday apparel to casual wear and sports clothing. They have completely taken over my wardrobe with their awesome fit, great quality and top-notch designs. Today I want to focus on their graphic tees again. You have seen me wear a ton of different designs in my videos, even if they are not sponsored by Into DAM. They're just so comfortable, I don't want to wear anything else. And the art is just so unique. Each shirt blends surrealism with polished digital craftsmanship and modern streetwear design, resulting in clothes that feel both artistic and modern. It's just a style that I personally enjoy so much. And I'm happy to say that I had the opportunity to create this new t-shirt design that's centered around the tropes of this channel. I'm proud to announce that the Travarian t-shirt design is now live and can be purchased through the Into DAM website. It's the perfect opportunity to save big, as they are currently running their biggest sale of the year, the Black Friday sale, and you can save up to 60% site-wide. Some of the inventory is limited though, as they're constantly rotating out stock to make room for new and fresh designs, so better check now if your favorite shirt is still available. You can grab an additional 10% off using the link in the description and entering the code on screen if you want to pick up this t-shirt along with some of their other awesome designs. If you're looking for a cool way to express yourself, Into DAM is your one-stop source for that. Purchasing my shirt design directly supports the channel, so thanks if you do, and thanks a lot to Into DAM for being such a great partner over the years. I started by stippling on a darker red over the initial texture, making sure that it looked irregular and had some of the metallics shine through here and there, of course mostly on the edges. Midway I switched to a brighter red to add even more texture over the darker red, and then once it was dry I painted the foundation for a white stripe right down the middle. Again starting from a darker color, basically mixing my desaturated pale grey blue and a little black, and then gradually adding white as I stipple on more and more layers. I grabbed a couple of these mighty brush decals that are really awesome and have a lot crisper lines and edges than most Games Workshop decals, and I picked out a red skull to put in the middle of this white stripe, and I found some white swords to put in the red. Swords were a little big though, so I had to freehand them instead. For the scribbled lines, I usually pick out a brush that has like 2 hairs left at the tip, but has a large enough belly to retain a good amount of paint, so I don't have to pick up paint constantly. And then I just try to paint irregular horizontal lines. The paint I'm using is usually a mix of burnt sienna and black, because just using pure black is too jarring. Adding a little flow improver helps too, and in case you can't read what I wrote, it says, "Dear warp entity, do not possess me please. Signed, Steve." I'm also using this paint mix to add a little discoloration to the heraldry, just hitting the lower edges and thinning it down a lot to wipe over the surface once or twice. I started the loincloth with a base color of extra dark green by AK, but that turned out to be a little too dark. maybe the name should have given that away. So instead, I only added a little bit of that paint to pale grey blue again, and covered most of the cloth. I made sure to drag my brush across in a line pattern, so very small specks of this dark color would still show, so I guess the darker green had a purpose after all. Now I'm adding more and more pale grey and gradually cover less and less area, eventually only hitting the more exposed folds. You can see that I'm using horizontal strokes again, and I think this is what I like the most about this style of painting. I can just take one of these older brushes that is splitting a bit at the tip, and it opens up all these opportunities for additional texture. Here I can just do a single brush stroke and the individual hairs will leave a couple of parallel lines, and that's exactly what I need here to make this look like heavier and structured material. I wanted to add some detail to this large surface, but I also wanted to keep the time investment down while being able to add further features later on. So I only did this red outline, and whenever I have more patience, I will add some more imperial symbols and shapes. I thought it would be a nice contrast to have something that looked more technologically advanced in the mix, with the more archaic look the armor had now. And the monitors on the medic arm were a great opportunity. I painted them in darker base colors like green and red, and then built a gradient with pure white and transparent layers. Then I covered these gradients with bluer paints corresponding to the main color. I did the large one in orange and then went back to the mighty brush decals, and I really wanted to make the Pong game work on the monitor, but unfortunately it was too large and there was just no way. So I went with the heartbeat monitor instead. Of course I had to integrate that with the rest and build an outline with white before I partially covered that with Imperial Fist contrast paint. My idea to make the Nemesis Halberd feel in-universe was to keep it almost black with a few bright blue and white glowing edges. I wasn't set on how much space these brighter parts would take up, so I started from white just to make sure. Then I covered that in Pilar Glacier and a little Aqua Alchemy turquoise, and the slightly irregular layer that resulted is just fine, because that just adds to the chaotic feel of the energy patterns. And then I gradually added a dark blue to the mix and built some more erratic patterns with different brush strokes, while overall slowly darkening the flatter areas. Eventually moving on to black, only leaving small lines of blue on the edges, and then dabbing on pure Aqua Alchemy for additional detail and variation. The backside looked a bit boring, so I channeled my inner El Miniaturista and made it look like the suit is burning through 12 tons of rocket fuel per second. Using white oil paint to set up the bright underpainting, letting it run into the recesses, and then building a more general glow with a few bursts of white through the airbrush. I built the main color with orange fluo paint and made sure there was some spill onto the adjacent areas to reinforce the feeling of radiating heat. And then using red fluo paint, I made the top part of the exhaust darker, and then using my new secret weapon, liquid enamel fluo pigment, which makes this a lot easier, simply for the reason of being so intense and opaque at the same time. It makes it superfluous to add back another layer of white before the yellow. And once it's dry, you can see that this step makes everything come together nicely. I'm carefully dry brushing more red on the raised parts and then covering less air with a black layer. I already had some red spill on areas that would reflect the glow, so I only had to add some white that I covered with a layer of orange fluo, and I think that makes the effect look perfect without too much work invested. I painted 2 dots of white following the shape of the eye lenses, and then covered it in a mix I originally used for the Halberd base color. That stained the white a bit, and also added that slightly glow from within effect to the recesses. To draw everything together, the idea was to add a little grime, a little extra wear, and in hindsight I think this is not really necessary, but I used thin glazes of burnt sienna to build some brown discolorations. I think it looks fine in some of the darker areas, like on the underside of the helmet, near the scaffolding on the backside of the legs, or around these spherical parts. But I don't think I would cover any of the raised areas again the way I did. Last but not least, I painted the stones on the base in a brown-gray color and then dumped some martial soil-colored pigment on the base. And I also dusted the feet a little to make the mini look part of this world. And then I called it done. Except for a little color choice hiccup in the beginning, I think this worked out better than I expected. The texture looks great, and I like the bright and reflective parts standing out against the muted and matte grey-blue areas. And most of all, it was really surprising how fast this was. I don't think I ever went more YOLO than this, and it's great to see it still coming together regardless. If you're cutting back on some of the detail work and doing it in a batch painting assembly line, I think you can crank out a mini that looks way better than it should, given the investment in under an hour. In any case, let me know what you think, and remember, I have tons of videos covering other Space Marine chapters in this grimdark approach, some of which you can see on screen now, and you can just click any of these thumbnails to watch them. Thanks a lot to my Patreon supporters. After all of these years, you are still the reason why this channel exists. Keep pushing that pigment, and see you in the next one.